everybody. Didn't realise it. You're here for the A session, our keynote speaker. Do come. So I've got a couple of questions for Corey, but it's going to be pretty boring if we only address my agenda. I interviewed Corey back in February. See that interview online on the CI website. So I could repeat that interview with him for the next half hour if you like, but I don't suggest I do that. I had hoped that on our Teams app, I'd be able to pick up some of the questions that people might want to ask who are online. But at the moment, I'm not getting fed those. So, Corey, I'm going to have to kick off by reflecting on the fact that your keynote followed on from the State Treasurer's keynote. And he said some very flattering words about you. I don't think I've ever heard a politician be so nice to a state official, to a civil servant, but there you go. What's it been? What's it like? Reflect for me a little bit on how it is to work with politicians when you're, if I might say, a technocrat. You know, you're an engineer. You're a technical person. How do you interface with politicians, and what are some of the challenges that brings?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, as a public servant, which I am, and my team, the public service, I was charged with delivering infrastructure on behalf of the government. Most important thing is to be open and transparent and don't blur the lines of accountability. So at the end of the day, in terms of the delivery accountability, it lies with me, and must keep out of politics. Yep. So it's all about delivering the infrastructure and being very transparent about it, and being open and honest and robust in your advice, and believing your convictions, and just keeping out of politics.
It seemed to me you were benefiting from the fact that as a politician, he's been in similar roles for a decade or more. I mean, we heard some of the CIB people referring to, interfaces that he'd had with them 10, 12 years ago. Is that a big advantage for you, the fact that there's been that continuity, that he's stayed with the industry, as it were, at least to some extent?
Well, certainly, Treasurer Palace was an ex-roads minister, major projects. He certainly has a background in roads infrastructure. We also have a huge interface with the Department of Treasury and Finance and / the Treasurer, because all the policies of projects have to be approved within government and go through subcommittees of cabinet. So, Department of Treasury, Department of Premier Cabinet, Premier, the Treasurer, the Minister, all key decisions, key strategic decisions go through government.
So I'm asserting that maybe you've been fortunate to have such a career, a politician who's been in our sector for so long. Without naming names, what about other politicians that you work with that perhaps didn't have the same experience? How do you connect with them? How do you get them to understand the importance of what you're trying to do?
Yeah, well, we have pretty stringent reporting framework in place. So performance reporting of projects is pivotal to project success. Making sure that you're very transparent with government about how you're going and what the key issues are, what the key risks are, what the key challenges are. If anything, it's an exception reporting about the things which are a problem, not the things which are good. Yeah.
Do you think more politicians get the value of infrastructure?
Well, certainly the ones that I work with do. I suppose that's a pretty broad question. Yes. In the experience that I've got, all the ministers who are involved certainly have a good appreciation of what we do.
In the room, we've got a lot of researchers, early career researchers, mid-career, late career, some of them, and online. Would you have any advice for them in terms of how they should interface with with politicians, or indeed with you, with yourselves? What's the value of research for you, and how can researchers communicate that value better?
That's a good point. So I think if you want to get some support for what you're doing, if you've got outcomes that can come with it, certainly you need to expose those, explain those to whoever you want that support from. So I think for me, it's if research can help manage strategies going forward, which might be problematic. As an example, we should certainly would highlight that and push it really hard.
Just going to pause there. Does anybody want to join in the conversation? Do we have another mic for the? Thank you. That's great. Whilst we're bringing the mic over there, and then we'll come forward for the second question at the front. Just bear with me a second. Would one of my colleagues mind telling me, or working out, if not for this session, for the next session, how we can get some of the questions and interface from those people online? I want to make sure that they're not excluded from the discussions. So unfortunately, my app is not giving me a chat function on Teams, which I might have expected, but it's not there. So I can't easily pick up questions online. Apologies to those online. Can we sort of work out a way of doing this by this afternoon, so that I don't know whether people are going to have to. You'll do that. So you're going to feed me the questions that are coming online. That's absolutely fantastic. I'll prepare another seat for you to brief me. So a question from the floor, and then a question at the front second.
Thanks. Peter Newman, I'm from Perth and work with Keith Hampson. But the amazing speech from the Minister and yourself about the growth in the construction business and how important it is, the responsibilities. And then you let slip a little bit at the end about the problems of diversity and of suicides, mental health. I'm just wondering if somehow all three of those things are linked, and whether or not, I was speaking to one of the women engineers here. She said a lot of that talk about the massive responsibility and growth and stuff is bullshit. in a sense that it's always overstating and the massive need for what you're doing, and yet the responsibility, which is huge, is full of risks and issues and deadlines that overwhelm. And at the same time, you're saying we don't have enough women here, and probably a good reason, and there's a suicide rate that's 6 times higher than normal. This is serious. And I'm just wondering how the culture, how you can link the culture more into something that's not quite over the top like it is at the moment.
Let's hear the second question as well, and then we'll take them as a pair, if you don't
mind. Corey, thanks very much for your presentation. It was really enlightening. It's sort of one of the things that you said was about getting the right team, getting the right mindset, which probably goes a little bit with your question as well. But the one thing that you probably from a time limitation perspective didn't have a chance to actually explain more fully is that for many of the projects, particularly the LXRA, are done as alliancing, which is a totally different mindset from the business as usual. And it sort of brought me back to research that I'd done with Keith Hampson 20-odd years ago on the National Museum of Australia, when we first saw alliancing in action and how that encourages and facilitates that culture that you're talking about. I wondered whether perhaps you might elaborate a little bit more about your journey from the Lines project that you did on the regional rail through to this, how that's informed your thinking.
How do you want to go about that? Start with the general question about culture, and then address Peter's comments about sides and women.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, I worked on the Melbourne City Link project in the late 90s for Boulderstones, and this was my first, I suppose, bad experience. The job itself was enormous. Young engineers were promoted well above their, because we hadn't seen a big project like that in Victoria's history for a very long time. And the company lost 10 years profit, and they practically went bankrupt. So I saw my senior people two levels above me actually lose their roles, and anyone who was involved in the tender were gone. The job itself actually was a hard slog, but it was probably more a hard slog because of the nature of the effect to the company I worked for. And that's when I got exposed to superintendents and some, I suppose, workplace bullies that probably weren't that well behaved and got promoted by the project director. They sort of could do what they wanted. I think that actually had a profound effect on my view about life and how projects should or shouldn't be run. Then going from there, I came into government about sort of 16 years ago, and I worked on Regional Fast Rail, which was another big rail project. Similar problem, project was scoped poorly. Contractors all went into competition, bid one another down. They won the work, they battled to make a margin. And then I became the CEO of the Regional Rail Link Authority, which ran that job, and that was the biggest publicly funded project in the state's history. And I basically said to the government when we set the job up, I'm not repeating a city link, I'm not doing what went wrong on that last one, and I want to actually, by risk-based assessment, we'll package the job up and do it. We won't make it too big that companies can't kill themselves, and we'll do it in a way that will do that. And we had D&Cs, we had alliance contracts, and we had franchisee contracts. We broke it up in 8 packages. I think the lesson learnt, probably one was in the tendering phase, we probably went a bit too fast with our procurements of the alliances, not if in hindsight, given them more time. But in terms of the project's delivery, well, it was very successful. It actually finished well ahead of time, and the project budget contingency we handed back $1 billion. So I think what that showed me was if you can set the benchmarks properly with the contracts, they can work. Then moving on to level crossings, put simply, when you've got a live rail environment where, and I should have said this before, we've got a live rail environment where you're building infrastructure for a third party, being Metro Trains or V-Line, and it's their train drivers and their track and civil maintainers and civil maintainers. It's very difficult to do that with D&C environments. So, and I wanted to incentivise Metro Trains to be part of what we're doing. So that got me over the line with the government, with Treasury and the government. We would have alliance contracts for level crossings. And then I said to the government, if you want the 20 crossings removed by 2018, if you don't do this, this is the only way to do it, and I think it's the best way to manage risk, and that's what we'll do. So we did that, and we removed, I think, 26 crossings in the first 3.5 years. And what we've been able to grow though now is a really it's certainly not a world first, but certainly strategically it's pretty efficient. Where as we're going through and doing works, any key lessons which are learnt from an alliance contract, we make sure we incentivise the alliance partners to share that lessons learned with other packages. So as we're delivering infrastructure, they share lots of innovations across the program. To the example, we've got a bespoke bridge design called a TROF, UTROF section design, which we use for most sections of elevated railway now. So it's a type of a U-beam which we use, and it's only really developed to that point because of the innovation we've been able to drive by the collaboration across the program. I've got another example where we had a contractor get into trouble that they were short of signaling overhead power resources for overhead power construction, where we bought another package, brought in resources to help that. had another example where they got into trouble with signalling design or signalling commissioning, and we took other resources out of another package and brought them in. So you can't do those things with D&Cs and different forms of contracts, whereas because it's such a whole of program attitude, it's worked a treat. And you know, we're now forcing those packages now to innovate, but also share lessons learned, but also be, you know, when I say innovation, I'm talking about also the sharing of effectiveness, like efficiencies and things like that as well. So, and they know very well if they don't keep up with what they're doing, they run the risk of actually losing work in the future. So, I think the key to it is that they've got the contracting partners have got to feel opportunity. They've also got to feel the pressure if they don't perform. So that's a good part of the model.
Yes, come back to the other question from Peter in a second. So there's a spectrum of collaborative techniques, aren't there? And alliancing very much part of it by the sound of that, building on obviously the earlier experience you referred to. So the challenge earlier was a collaborative culture, but you know, we're not attracting women, and we've got the high suicide rate. Is you know, what's going on here? And by changing the culture, will we attract more women? Will we see less suicides? Or it would be a really trivial way to perhaps paraphrase your question, Peter. What do you think?
I have no doubt that's right. If there was more women in leadership roles, and I should just condition this. There's plenty of women in. Like I look at my team, 2,500 people. We're at 50-50 male female. Where it falls apart is it's in leadership roles. It's where the balance is not right. It's not in the workforce. The workforce is more than fine. However, in the construction workforce, you know, the blue collar, it's not that. It's dominated by blokes. And if I look at the trade union movement, they're dominated by blokes. If I look at the CEOs of the companies that I work with, dominated by blokes. One level down, though, in those construction companies, there are women in leadership roles. It's not like there's not some, but they're not in the operational roles where you might want them to be. And you know, it sort of, if you look at the sector, it works too hard. It works too many hours. It has so much pressure. It's got a history in the last 100 years of, you know, basically bankrupting itself, I suppose. A lot of construction companies in the 30 years I've been working don't exist today that were there, you know, in the last 30 years. And you know, when you bring those stresses to projects, and those projects bring stresses to those companies, it can't but not affect people's well-being. It's just impossible. You can't say it's not linked. It's linked. And yep, I'd say there was a direct correlation between diversity and the suicide rate. Absolutely.
All power to the elbow of a client who clearly wants to set the right environment to do something about this, it seems to me. Any more thoughts? I had another thought. You talked at one point about bid cost reimbursement. Was it industry pressure that brought you to need to do that? What was your thinking there?
Well, my battle has been with our state treasury about how much you pay.
What proportion of bid cost?
Yeah. Whereas, you know, bizarrely with our lines contracts, we paid the 100%. So what could possibly go wrong? I'll just take an example of, say, a metro tunnel. We get 3 bidders. We gave them 4 months or 5 months to price the works. We gave them a fixed amount of information. We then asked 3 bidders to come in under a competition to price it, and it's to be built over 6 or 7 years. And we gave them a fixed amount of information, and then you've got a detailed design, the infrastructure, and then scope it up and build it. You know, you add all those ingredients, I can promise you, on multi-billion-dollar projects, you're going to get it wrong. So what drove me on North East Link in particular was just basically to pay the builders what they spent. And by doing that, that incentivised them to spend as much money as they needed up front to give them the best chance of winning the job, but also giving them the best chance to have the most appropriate price. Yeah, I'll say appropriate price, not the cheapest price, appropriate price. Yep. So industry also all sort of, they ask for it, but one of the things the industry do badly is they they sometimes accept things they shouldn't when they're in a competition. They probably should, in my view, sometimes step back and say, no, we're not doing that. Whereas because they want to look like they're a problem, or it's because of the sheer pressure of the competitions why they won't change their ways.
They've learnt that behaviour by working with other, if I might say, less informed clients, haven't they?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think we should encourage our bidding partners to spend the right amount of appropriate amount of money to get the best possible outcome for the project's sake. In a story, and by the way, paying loser bidders fees, you buy the information they give you, and by the information they give you, I'll bet you that the cost of the losing bidder fees pays for the innovation you bought. Yeah, and that was the argument I ran with Treasury, and they were pretty good about it.
Was involved with a project at Bank Underground Station in London, where they adopted a similar philosophy on the basis that the innovations in the losing bids they would buy and therefore have the right to use in the winning bid, and it was worth the bid cost to do that. Yep. And a very successful project it is too. Do we have any more questions? Have I got the online participation yet? I haven't. Hi, Hisham.
Right. Thank you, Corey. Great presentation. I'm not sure how much you know about our HS2 in United Kingdom, but it's a project that delayed, come over budget, and now it's irrelevant in a way. So how much of the work in Victoria would anticipate the change of technology? And for the duration of the project, the thing's moving very fast. So the investment model is changing very fast with the disruptive technologies and everything else. So how much do you take into account such a changing in the environment?
So you're talking about the sealing technology they're going to utilise with that project?
Well, in HS2 is a very difficult project in so many ways. This is the high speed. But one of the reasons is that change of technology. That became irrelevant with time, and it became more expensive as well. So that change of technology, like introduction of autonomous vehicle in the future and so on. So we invest so much in the beginning, but by the time we finish that project, the project itself becomes irrelevant in a way.
Or another way of putting it might be, to what extent is future-proofing an important part of what you do with these mega projects, which take 10, 20 years to realise, and during those 10, 20 years, as Hisham points out, technology changes, beyond any comprehension, really.
Yeah, so Metro Tunnel the business case was finished in 2016, so we started, it was the current government's policy in 2014, the election. So what's that? It'll be about 11 years. I think we've been pretty lucky because we've been behind in technology in Victoria. We don't have any automatic train control or CBTC, what it's called here, and that's the first project for it. We did realise though that we first assumed that we would build it the whole length for the alignment from Dandenong to Sunbury, but then all of a sudden, as other projects came on board, it affected the layout. It actually affected parts of what we were going to roll out. So we had to modify what was going to be rolled out to be primarily just in the tunnels and a bit more either side. So that was a good example of other policies actually affected the rollout of what we had to do. But that didn't make it redundant. It just made it, from a timing sequencing point of view, we wouldn't be finishing it on time. We'd be still doing it for years and years and years until these other projects were finished to do it. So that's why we've made a few decisions like that. But I can see, I can see how something like that, HS2 can, over that time scale, can have decisions or assumptions in the business case which change. But this gets to the point of, when you're talking about multi-billion dollar contracts, you're asking builders to actually price these works. Their assumptions at the bidding phase versus what happens in 9 or 10 years' time, it makes it a huge, enormous challenge for them to get that right. But the same thing with business cases. Like business cases, if a business case is going to capture something for 10 year, for a 10 or so year period, you just about guarantee there'll be changes which will affect the assumptions of the business case. Hence the one I explained about Metro Tunnel, and it actually came out in an Auditor General report last week, this issue, and the headline was a bit negative, but the reasoning behind it was completely sensible, what we did.
Used to hear a lot in all projects, but in mega projects as well, about the transfer of risk, and that somehow the client could transfer 100% of the risk to the supply chain. And it's examples like this which show it's complete rubbish, because no matter how much you might have transferred financial penalties for running late or something, at the end of the day you don't get your railroad, and so it is the client's risk. Whether or not you can get penalties out of the supply chain is kind of neither here nor there, particularly as you point out, as they may well go bust in the process. So hence, what drove alliancing in many parts of the world, it seems to me, a recognition by the intelligent client that they have to share risk, because some of that risk they will never transfer. London Heathrow Airport also was alongside yourselves, up there in recognising this at quite an early stage. No one's coming online. If you email don.ward@cibworld.org, I'll pledge to ask the first person who sends me an email with a question. Put your question to Corey, unless it's rubbish, in which case, so no pressure, but send me a decent question online. Anyone else? I'll tell you what I wanted to ask, and in the absence of anyone sticking their hand up in the audience either, I will ask it. What would you like people to be researching, Corey? Can you think of an unknown, one or two things where you wake up and you think, I wish I knew X, Y, Z, or I wish I had more information on a particular subject in the industry? What could a young researcher in the audience choose to look at that would be of value to you?
Yeah, I reckon there's some people today here I've had a conversation with, but also out of here. It would be good for someone to do some research on the actual outturns of contracts, the different types of contracts, and the reasons why. Now, what you'll find is, I think it'll be hard to get some of that data, but for me, it'd be good to know, it'd be good to do some research on, is a contractor more motivated by a fixed price, where they have to build a project for a fixed price, where there's more at stake for the company, versus a contractor who was part of an alliance and they are able to be protected by the cost risk. And what I'd like the focus to be is, in terms of the fixed price, some transparency about what a contractor does to protect themselves from price risk and cost risk, and how they do that, and what that means in their strategy, and then to analyse, what do you think's the what from a motivational point of view, is one way better or the other, or are they just horses for courses? And then the other aspect is the cheapest price in a fixed price tender as good as comparing it to an alliance where you might have a competitive target outturn cost? What will give you the best outcome in terms of certainty?
The editor of Construction Management and Economics at the moment is Paul Chan, isn't it? We need some of Paul Chan's papers in this. Who's done any work? There must be someone in the audience who's looked at this, apart from someone who's already asked a question. No disrespect. Oh, go on. No one else is biting. So.
Actually, one of the PhDs that have been done in that area was Sean Sweeney. And that must have been about 2008 or 9, and he's heading up the Auckland rail project. So I see you nodding, so you probably know Sean. Maybe you might want to share his PhD thesis with you. I can send you a copy. I've got a copy as well. The question I was going to ask, or just sort of ask, from an observation, I've probably interviewed perhaps about 100 alliance practitioners, most of them in the senior levels, over the last 10 years or so. One of the things that really struck me about the difference between the people that were really enthusiastic about the alliancing in the senior roles was that there'd been a phenomenal, in my from my perspective, a phenomenal sort of switch around of people that have been working in the public sector in a role as a public servant, working as a design consultant with a design firm, and working with the contractor side. So it seemed to me that the major difference here in Australia that I could tell from, say, the United States and Canada and some parts of Europe that I've done research in, was this amazing diversity of backgrounds, and therefore how they could then see that there was lots of questions that they didn't have answers for, but they knew some of their colleagues had answers for. What's your reflections on that?
Are you talking about key leadership roles in my teams where the people who are in there come from the private sector?
I interviewed people that were clients representative, design senior levels in these teams, as well as the contractor level. So most of them were on the alliance management team or alliance leadership team.
Yep.
And there was probably about 100 that I've spoken to, and it's been a pretty consistent observation of mine that many of them had been in different roles in different disciplines, and they were much more open-minded about potential challenges to assumptions they've made than I saw in all the years that I'd worked in, like you, some really shitty jobs.
So to put it another way, is it a big advantage to have worked partly as a contractor, partly as a consultant, partly as a client? Do you think you get more perspectives in that way, which mean that you can do a better job, particularly in the alliancing context?
Yeah, absolutely. Like a part of, you know, we've got a number of big teams across our program now. So what's critical for me is that as we build up these teams and we set our procurement strategies up, that there'll be certain key roles where I must have the right person with the right background and skills and culture to manage that role. So, for example, in my 5 program, I've got 5 chief executives, and the 5 chief executives have 5 chief operating officers who are the non-government people, I call them. They're the private sector deliverers. They've got the experience and the capability from the private sector to deliver those roles. And then permeating in the teams, depending on what level you're talking about, but on each ALT, so Alliance Leadership Team and ALT in particular, I have a dominant delivery person who has that experience and background most of the time. I mean, there are some exceptions. We do have some very bright people that we've trained to come from, who might have only had a small amount of private sector experience, but have been around for 15 years that are more than capable in the ALTs now where they are. I mean, I'm worked for a construction company for 16 years, so yeah, you don't have to have been there until 2 weeks ago. But certainly it's a really good point, a really good question, that it's so important that you've got the right resource that's in the ALT with the skills, the culture, and the capability of actually managing. You know, really, they're representing me and representing government. You know, they've got that accountability of the performance and the oversight of what the hell's going on. Yes, it's part of an ALT. Yes, it's, you know, it's a collaborative relationship, but the reality is the cost and time and safety and well-being, community interface, all these important aspects. That person's got to be totally on top of all that, and that's where I spend most of my time with the CEOs, the chief operating officers, and then those people across the program. When there's problems, they're spending time in my office on a regular basis dealing with problems. Yeah,
I have seen contractors who've complained for years that they're not treated with respect, or they want more collaboration, move across to the client side and suddenly forget all that and decide to be equally hard ass and old school. But by and large, to be fair, I find people take that experience over and are all the wiser and more effective for the fact they've had that experience of, as it were, on both sides of the fence. Poacher turned gamekeeper or something might be an analogy here, but I'm glad to hear that you find that a definite positive.
Oh, it's a must. And I'm probably worried now that there's too many people coming from the construction sector. We sort of we've attracted too many. So now I'm trying to sort of stop it, and which is difficult because when you've got to fill roles, you can't stop people applying for jobs.
But wouldn't it be a fantastic legacy if you did take them in for 5 years and then, as it were, hand them back to the supply side?
Absolutely.
With all the extra experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. That's a good point, and that's something we want to see more of. Yeah. And we have had that, by the way. There have people in rail projects in Victoria clearly had come for experience and got it, been here 5 or 7 years, and they're back out there. Yeah.
Cam, you stuck your hand up there. Have you got the mic? You have.
Thank you. Campbell Middleton from the University of Cambridge in the UK. My question is, the construction sector seems to be somewhat unique in that it expects contractors and consortium to bid for major tenders on large projects on partially completed design, perhaps 30% the building sector.
Yep.
And my question to you, Corey, is that rational, or should we actually be standing back and realising that we need to procure on the basis of, I would argue, completed designs, or certainly substantially completed designs, where that effort goes up front?
Yeah, you've raised a very good point. It was something I was talking about earlier. So if I look at North East Link, that's my latest big tender. I don't know what the 30%. I'm not sure what percentage I'd call it, but because of the type of work, and then because we tendered Westgate, and we sort of, and then they're building Westgate, and this is where the $100 million per bid fee. So basically, I enabled the builders, the tenderers, to spend a lot more money up front to get where they were comfortable to get to be able to be satisfied that they had enough information to do what they needed to do. But then as the tender unfolded, we converted it to an ITC. So there was another way they were protected outside that. But yeah, no, it's a good point, and I think you'll find in New South Wales as well, there's lots of big jobs where it's a reference designs given to them. It's nowhere near detailed design, and detailed design can take a number of years on these big jobs. So you're probably not going to do that either. But it does get to the point when you assess a risk, when you risk assess a strategic analysis of the procurement of a project. That for me is a key strategic risk. You've actually got to properly understand that, and in some ways should be driving what the outcome of the procurement model even is.
We're into the last sort of 5 minutes of our session here. No one online's taken me up on the challenge to email me a decent question. So you've got your last chance, folks. Anybody else want to change the subject of the discussion for the last 5 minutes, perhaps? Corey, certainly you've set out, 3 or 4 challenges really for where, for research. We've talked about women in construction. We've talked about culture generally. We've talked about, what makes a difference in terms of tendering costs and so on, and the research challenge that you specifically referred to earlier. I'm delighted to say that all of those subjects actually are addressed to a greater or lesser extent by one or other of the CIB commissions. We perhaps haven't said so much about the environmental side, or the environmental impact of the industry. CIB was inaugurated under the auspices of the United Nations in the 1950s, believe it or not, and as such we're pretty much aligned to doing everything we can to make sure that research in our sector contributes to attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. How much pressure do you guys come under when we look at environmental sustainability and environmental impact?
Well, we get what they call the ISCA ratings across our projects, across our program. I wouldn't say it's enormous pressure per se, but we certainly have some pretty fundamentally important strategic outcomes which are required from a lot of our infrastructure. And also we've got what we call a recycling first policy now, which is a government's initiative to how we use recyclable materials across our program, whether it's plastics, rubber tyres, you name it, it's there. And then of course you've got on the level crossings for the 64 crossings we removed think we built nearly 40 stations, and the 40 stations, there's obviously greenhouse initiatives which are part of them and have been part of them for quite a while now.
And I mean, to be fair, rail is in terms of transport, at least one of the greener methods of such transport. And if you're taking more cars off the roads, at least until they're all electric, then the emissions will.
Well, the level crossings are doing two things. They're taking cars. They're freeing up road bottlenecks, and they're allowing more trains to operate on the rail network. So they're sort of twofold. Yeah, pretty good initiative that way.
Okay, well, Corey, I'm going to give you an opportunity for a final word to our audience. What would be your message to a global group of people focused on innovation and making a difference in terms of improving our industry?
I think if I focus on culture, if you can undo the fear, or undo the lack of desirability to actually want to do something, the world's their oyster, and it's only as good as how we make it, and that's what I'll finish on.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so grateful to NTIA for being the platinum sponsor for this conference. I'm really grateful for the time you've committed in preparing for this session. I mean, we spoke back in February in preparation for this, and I'm sure everybody will agree and appreciate the thoughtfulness with which Corey has addressed the questions which have come from the floor. So virtually or in the room, please join me in thanking Corey and his organisation deeply for their support. Thank you, Corey.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
No worries.
Oh, that's the end of this. That's the format. Give me some feedback if you're happy with that sort of format for the Q&A with keynote speakers. That's the sort of format we've got in mind for the rest of the 4 days. So typically we've got a keynote morning and afternoon over the 4 days, or 8 or 10 of them in total. That's how we're proposing to handle it. So a little bit more open, a little bit more further discussion with panelists. But if you want to do it a different way, let me know. And particularly those people online, I'm very, very conscious to try and give you the same access, the same opportunity, the same experience and the same value of the conference. And that is very difficult, and it's particularly difficult if you can't get any questions across to me, of course. So please, let's find a way to get more involvement from people online. Meanwhile, that's the end of this session. I wish you, hope you know where you're going next, for those of you who are going on to your working commission sessions and so on. And I look forward to seeing you later in the day. Thank you.